It's my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Nachiket Barve. Nachiket is a well-established, fashion designer. He recently won the national award for designing all the costumes in the film Tanaji, the Unsung Hero. He's won the Woolmark, prize. He has shown his designs on runways both in India and abroad. And today he's here to not speak on how to make a fashion statement, but essentially how to make fashion into a statement. So, Nachiket, the stage is yours. Welcome.
Thank you for that kind introduction. So firstly, thank you for all, showing up and being an amazing audience already. I think I'm a very unlikely candidate to be here because my origins couldn't have been further away from fashion than one can imagine. So everybody in my family is a doctor, and our dinner table conversations do not involve couture or clothes or bags. They involve, perforated livers and, people getting colonoscopies, which is not exactly the most appetizing conversation. But sometimes the apple does fall far from the tree, and I landed up in fashion. I thought today evening, rather than me breaking fashion down into fundas or trying to kind of make it knowledge based, I thought I'll just take you through my journey, take you through my thinking process, maybe inspire you in the process while we do that, and importantly also engage with you. There is still fashion still is a mystical beast. There is, you're either in or you're out, you're in style or you're out of style. It's considered a very hostile space where either you can sit with us or you can't sit with us, and I think that thinking needs to be shattered, because at the end of the day what we do is at least from my point of view, is a very welcoming open embrace. Everybody has to enjoy fashion. What is the purpose of fashion is something I ask myself many a time. And is it to stand out in a room? Is it to express yourself? Is it to create a brand differential? Perhaps it's all of those things. But most importantly, what fashion is a tool for joy. It's a tool to bring happiness. It's a tool to bring functionality and utility into your lives, where you feel you're presenting yourself as the best version of yourself. This is one of my favorite quotes. It says, it's not what you look at that matters, it's what you see. And I think that just applies not just to fashion, but really through all of how we experience life itself. Fashion, what? Like I said, my beginnings couldn't have been further removed from fashion than one can imagine. Can you go next, please? So that's me in the 80s. Very inspired by God knows what the references were, but perhaps the remnants of Studio 54. So there is a psychedelic polyester shirt and micro shorts, as you can see. But it's been a long process since. Yeah. And, so I'll just kind of run you through the process. So I was born in Mumbai. I went to a very quaint, lovely school called Palitilak Vidyalaya, where my dad had gone, my aunt had gone. And I was really like an alien in that atmosphere, because for like there was no semblance of fashion, there was no semblance of style. And people asked me, so with this background, how did you get to? And I have a very simple answer. The nurse who delivered me just dropped me on the floor. So that's where I think something hit, and that's where we came from. I passed through, sleepwalked through BCom, because that was the sensible, logical thing to do. And not one balance sheet ever tallied. So don't take business advice. Not one, P&L statement tallied, but those for me were just numbers, and what was life was little more than that. So after my 12th, I went and lived in New Zealand for a bit. And I worked at Burger King, where I cleaned dishes. I did, won an award for Employee of the Month or something like that for making the fastest burger that one could do. But I think two important things it taught me was, one, the value of hard work. Secondly, the dignity of labor, that the fact that you can do anything. And it harks back to a conversation I had as a child with my mother. I remember there used to be a cobbler who used to mend shoes at the corner of the street we lived in. And while passing every day, I used to look at what he was doing. And, it was very fascinating with all those instruments and the anvil and all of that. And I said, Mom, I want to be a cobbler. And she said, fine, be a cobbler, but be the best cobbler that there is. So that was a very important, guiding principle to kind of go through. And whether it was working at Burger King or whatever I do, I feel if you have that sense of wanting to do something correctly, whether somebody is watching or not watching, that takes you a long way.
Yep.
And this picture is actually very interesting because that's me in, I think, 99 in Burger King when I was a teenager in New Zealand. And 3 years ago, I went back to New Zealand, and there was a lady who worked there, and she was still there, and she was so happy to see me. So it's really those fleeting moments of joy that you kind of treasure onto more than all the material belongings. These are sketches that I made. So I had that 2 years that I was in New Zealand, I had a lot of free time to, learn by whatever the BCom course that I was doing was. But it gave me a time to really express myself through what I was doing and really explore. So these are 98, as you can see, and they're signed. After I came back, the first milestone happened in my life and my career, which was the support of my family, who, although they did not understand the F of fashion, like my parents both come from very, very, normal to underprivileged backgrounds. So just to take you a few decades back, my grandfather was in Konkan, and he actually ran away from home and worked in somebody's house as a household help in Palghar to fill water and do stuff like that. And even one night there was a fight and he slept on, Girgaon Chowpatty on the bench. And from then to supporting his family, dad learned on a scholarship, mom learned on a scholarship. So for them, the height of fashion was, or what they understood was, and Dadar at that point of time, and we are here in Dadar today, so it's full circle. You used to get saris which were in two parts. So it was the last remnants of a yardage of fabric, and they used to be stitched together, like in parts or whatever meterage was left. And those are, I think, 6 rupees or something like that. So they really came in from there. So when I see a lot of designers who are, bless them, have the privilege to grow up around fashion where they, played with their moms, silk chiffon saris or whatever that it was that inspired them. And I didn't come from any of that. So it's not like you have to, you just, like, again, it comes back to the thing. It's not what you look at, it's what you see. A big step in my life happened when I had a chance to go to, NID in Ahmedabad. So after my 12th, I applied for design and I got through NIFT and NID both. And that was a very important step because for the first time, you were kind of drawn into the world of design thinking, where you looked at design as a problem solving tool and something of utility. It was not something which was just frivolous. So whether it is you're talking about a certain shirt or a pocket square, these are all things that have got deeper, longer connections, and it really taught you to do things. It taught you to learn by, learn things by actual. And I've always been fascinated by the power of the hand. Not just that, also I think it inculcated a culture of, of people. So whether it is you look at something like a craft form, and that's something which has always guided my work through the years. I mean, fortuitously, tomorrow is Independence Day, and as a designer from India and as a designer in India, we are really sitting on such a wealth of craft, a wealth of heritage, stuff that we just take for granted. And through my work, as we will hopefully aim to demonstrate through this presentation, is there has to be a sense of awareness, a sense of education, and a sense of pride in what we do. And that was something that I think NID sowed the seeds for. Not Emily, but Nachiket in Paris. So every NID had a scholarship where one student was sent to Paris on a scholarship awarded by the French government. And I was very lucky to get that. So that was another milestone because, from the insular world of, say, being in Villepale and a certain kind of a milieu to then kind of going to Ahmedabad, which was like the world opening up in parts, to being in Paris where suddenly, you're at the table with the best in the world. So whether it's the best editors, there's the best stylists, there's the best designers, there was a sense of the world absolutely opening up. And that is another important thing because of two things. So I had a chance to study at École des Arts Décoratifs, and I interned and worked at Celine, which is a brand under the Louis Vuitton Moët Hennessy umbrella. And it was wonderful because we are talking, I mean, I'm not telling you how geriatric I really am, but it was a time before the internet and before the big brands and the international magazines came to India. And to have that world open up at that point, I think set me right, whether it was writing the press release a certain way, or whether it was, communicating what you're doing in the in your collection, or whether it was the quality of craftsmanship. There was an attitude of absolutely no compromise and competing with the best, which I think was an important step. Launching the label. I remember a very important conversation I had when I was at the Celine Atelier, and it was lunch break and we were all having our lunches by the Seine because it was a longish break. And everybody was talking about summer and how their grandmothers would be, wearing Madras checks and going to the beach and stuff. And it struck me at that point of time how Indian I really was because my grandmother only ever wore a sari, and that too a simple cotton one. And for me as an Indian designer in my 20s in Paris it was a kind of an identity shift where I realized I'm not European, but I'm also not the India that the French thought we were, you know. So this was a few years after Devdas had released and all of that. So they were all about, oh, the Maharajas, Magnifique, and Bollywood, Magnifique, and, you know, as if we all rode pink elephants to work every day. So that image of the exotic kind of India and then what was absolutely European, it made me acutely aware that I was an Indian, but with a global mindset, with a global platform, and an opportunity to do something that would represent that generation of today. So in 2007, I applied for the Gen Next platform at Lakme Fashion Week and launched the label. This was the first collection. It was called Couture Allure, and it was inspired by Audrey Hepburn. It started with the idea of taking Indian craftsmanship and really applying it in a way where these clothes could be worn in London, New York, Kyoto, or even Singapore. So, like a dress like that you see, the gray bias cut one, is it takes something like, I remember at that point, like about 375 hours of handwork. So it was silk, and it's about 18 meters of silk. So it was the quietest, most minimal luxury in its own way. That I always, even today, I believe that, you know, luxury should whisper and not shout. And that is what the funda behind all the clothes was. What is amazing to note, and I'm very proud of, is we still do orders on these clothes. So while people have kind of come to the idea of fast fashion or any of that now, that's been a guiding principle in what I've been doing through the years. These are some of the other snippets of the collections over the years when we were doing a lot of Western wear. You know, it was, and then, you know, I think also what it made me realize was how similar people are across the world. You know, I mean, we all want to look our best, feel a sense of joy when we kind of engage with fashion, storytelling to fashion. So what are clothes? I mean, you know, you put on a pair of shirt, or you pair of, you know, buy a new pair of shoes. Those are just that's the end result. I think what's exciting as a designer and as a design entrepreneur is the journey, is the thought process. It's what elevates objects from being more than the sum of their parts. So I'll just take you quickly through some of the collections. So this is a collection called Chiaroscuro, which in Italian is light and shadow, as you would know. And, you know, it was inspired by the whole idea of Gothic beauty of churches, of Hitchcock, of a lot of those elements which were kind of carried forward through black and white. And as a designer, I've always believed in working with Indian techniques, celebrating Indian craft, you know. Even something as modest as, say, the gajra. I mean, you know, you have a gajra wali at every corner, and we just kind of take it, you know, for granted. Like, this is how it's made, but it's a piece of craft. It takes skill, knowledge, aptitude to be able to take three pieces of string and weave flowers and create an object of classicism and beauty out of it. So the whole idea of light and shadow, or the whole idea of how you play with fabrics. So there's a lot of cut work, there's a lot of embroidery, there's a lot of techniques which have been passed down the generations and close to treasure. Again, I feel fashion is not something which is disposable, you know. Today, we kind of champion the cause of green fashion, of sustainable fashion, fashion which is slow fashion. But these are all things that have been built inherently into us as Indians. So whether you look at the idea of the Kanjivaram sari, I mean, these are saris which last decades. You know, you don't have to do anything about them. You don't even need to wash them. So it's reapplying some of those principles and philosophy to how we engage with clothes today. There was a collection called Kalahari, which was inspired by the beauty of the Namibian desert and the Kalahari desert and the Tuareg tribes and their textiles, and taking it forward in, again, assortment of you know, techniques and textiles that we do. This may be interesting to all the finance people sitting in the audiences. You know, in Holland in the 1600s, there was a you know, a phenomenon called tulip mania, where a single bulb of tulips was as much as a house in Amsterdam, and then suddenly the demand crashed. So it was, I mean, it's a very interesting phenomenon. But we wanted to take the idea of the tulip being such a celebrated flower and then translating it into clothes. So like a cape like this, again, maybe say about 1400 hours plus of embroidery. But these are objects that you want to keep and treasure and hold on to in ways because they speak to you and they celebrate something which is the best part of life. This is a collection for which I won the Woolmark Prize and represented India in Paris. So again, this was inspired by armor, and these were all in pure merino wool. But the idea was to kind of take wool, use entirely Indian craftsmanship, and create garments that can be sold across the world. We've done also a bunch of Indian wear. In this collection was called Millennial Maharanis, which was about the idea of the millennial generation who see themselves as modern day royalty because they have everything at their disposal and they really have the lifestyles that the erstwhile royalty had, and how we took that forward. This is the collection called Utopia. This was a interesting story because this was after COVID. So two things happened during COVID. A, we had a lot of time to think. Secondly, we had a lot of time to feel depressed. In the meantime, I also had a baby girl. So I think the culmination of all resulted in a certain freshness, a certain lightness, and the reinforcement of the idea that fashion essentially should be a tool to bring joy to your lives. So light fabrics, modern Indian wear that you can kind of celebrate in rather than looking like you live in the wrong century. I always say, if you need two people to help you wear a dress, honey, you're in the wrong century. There was a book, again, written by an Italian author on contemporary Indian fashion, and it feels good to represent the country and be one of the front runners of how Indian craft is perceived in the world. The British Council gave me an British Council Entrepreneur of the Year award, and that again was a milestone because it celebrated the marriage of craft and commerce, which is what is something I strongly believe in. The Woolmark Prize I spoke about, and a bunch of stuff that we've done over the years to kind of fly, hopefully, the flag of Indian fashion wider and further. We've been, again, if you see, I mean, what's interesting for me in this image is not the fact that the people are famous, but the fact that there's people across age groups and body types. So, you want fashion to be inclusive. Like I always, whenever somebody comes to me and says, oh, I need to go on a lemon diet for 3 weeks and then I'll come and buy a dress. I'm like, honey, get the dress, alter the dress later when you lose weight. And if you lose weight. So, these old dictats of what is acceptable, what things should be, have to change with time. That's across at Buenos Aires Fashion Week. And, it also was amazing because there's such a huge demand for people respond to Indian fashion across the world, I mean, for them, the fact that, oh, how is this done? Is this not a print? So there is a massive audience. It's just connecting the dots to lead to them.